Welcome to Watchflix. Today, I will show you a fantasy film from 1990 in the movie title, Edward Scissorhands. Warning: spoilers ahead. The movie starts on one evening. An elderly woman tells her granddaughter a bedtime story of where snow comes from, and by a story of a young man named Edward, the creation of an old inventor, who has scissors for hands. The inventor's final result was a human-like young boy, who had everything except for hands. But the inventor suffered a heart attack and died, while in the act of giving a pair of real hands to Edward, leaving him, unfinished, forever. Years have passed after Edward has created an Avon saleswoman, Peg Boggs, used to make her rounds selling makeup door to door to their neighborhood. One day, while she was out on one of her rounds, she notices something strange: decrypt mansion on the hill. She decides to go to the mansion for a possible sale opportunity. There, she enters the gate and is stunned by a beautiful garden. It took a while for Peg to realize nobody was home, so she starts taking stock of this empty mansion. There, she finds Edward alone in the dark attic. At first, when she meets Edward, she realizes he is quite odd, on his hands. Peg felt terrified when she saw Edward's had scissor hands, and upon realizing he is virtually harmless, she was brave enough and decides to take him to her home. At the Boggs house, Peg accompanies Edward to her daughter's room for him to stay for a meantime. While her daughter is out camping, Edward meets Peg's young son Kevin, and her husband, Bill, and became friends with them. In the afternoon, Edward saw Bill trimming an adept hedge, so he started to do what Bill is doing. Edward trims the adept hedge and turns it into a dinosaur. Kevin saw what Edward did and told his dad, and Bill was impressed when he saw what Edward did. One afternoon, the ladies insist Peg have a barbecue party to meet Edward. Peg's neighbors are also impressed by Edward's adept hedge trimming. Then Edward starts to trim all the adept hedge in the neighborhood. Later at night, Kim arrived on the camping trip, while Edward is in bed reminiscing about his inventor, and distracted when he saw Kim entering the room. Edward didn't know what to do but to keep silent. At first, Kim didn't notice Edward was there. Then she starts to take her clothes off. When looking at the mirror, Kim saw Edward's reflection and started to yell. Edward panics and accidentally pokes Kim's waterbed with his scissor hands, and everyone wakes up. Then later Peg introduces Kim to Edward. One morning, Edward trimming with the one's neighbor adept hedge. He saw a dog. Then he started to trim the dog's fur. Then the owner of the dog was so happy when she saw her dog's new look. Then everyone's dog wants to get a trim from Edward. Later, Edward shows off his haircutting skills to the neighbors. Everyone was impressed and wants to get a haircut. Not every one of the townspeople likes Edward. These two people, a religious fanatic named Esmeralda, and Kim's boyfriend, Jim. And later Edward falls in love with Kim, despite her initial fear of him. One of the housewives in the neighborhood, Joyce, an aging seductress, is attracted to Edward. Suggests that Edward opens a haircutting salon with her. While Joyce and Edward were on their way to examining a proposed site, she attempts to seduce him in the back room, causing Edward to leave in a state of panic. One evening, Jim plans to steal money from his parents. Wanting money for a van, Jim and his friends take advantage of Edward's ability to pick locks and uses this as an attempt to break into his parents' house. The burglar alarm sounds and everyone flees except Edward. Despite Kim's angry insistence that they return for him, Edward is arrested but is released when a psychological examination reveals that his isolation allowed him to live without a sense of reality and common sense. At the same time, the arresting officer befriends him. Meanwhile, maddened by Edward's rejection, Joyce exacts revenge by claiming that he tried to rape her. This, added to the break-in, causes many of the neighbors to question his personality, and therefore, wreck his popular reputation. During the Christmas season, Edward is feared and outcasted by almost everyone around him except the Boggs family, resulting in the family becoming outcasts as well. While the family is setting up Christmas decorations, Edward creates an angel ice sculpture. The shavings create an effect of falling snow, which Kim dances under. Jim calls out to Kim, distracting her, and Edward accidentally cuts her hand. Jim says that Edward had intentionally harmed her and attacks him. Edward runs away angrily, tearing his clothes. Kim, fed up with Jim's behavior towards Edward, breaks up with him and he goes to his friend's van to get drunk. While Peg and Bill search for Edward, he returns and Kim greets him with a hug. When Kevin is almost run over by Jim's drunk friend, Edward pushes him out of the way, but cuts his face, causing witnesses to think he was attacking him. When the police arrive, Edward flees to his hilltop mansion and the neighbors form an angry mob, led by Joyce, and follow, despite Peg and Bill's pleas. Officer Allen tries to deceive everyone by firing a few shots into the air to give the impression that Edward is dead, but the mob refuses to listen in. They continue to the mansion to see if Edward really is dead. Kim runs to the mansion and reunites with Edward. Jim follows her, attacks Edward, and angers him when Jim brutally assaults Kim. Edward stabs Jim in the stomach and pushes him out a window to his death. Kim confesses her love for Edward and shares a kiss with him as they say goodbye. Returning downstairs, Kim lies to the townspeople saying that Edward and Jim killed each other in the fight. She tells them that the roof caved in on them and shows them a disembodied scissor hand similar to Edward's. Shocked and saddened over his death, the neighbors return home. At the same time, the guilty Joyce realizes what her lies have done. The elderly woman, who is revealed to be Kim in her old age, finishes telling her granddaughter the story, saying that she never saw Edward again. She chose not to visit him because she wanted him to remember her the way she was in her youth. She tells her granddaughter that, "Sometimes you can still catch me dancing in it." While Edward creates more ice sculptures. A flashback of a young Kim is shown dancing under the snow falling from the angel ice sculpture above her. Thanks for watching. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up, and drop a comment below on your favorite part, and subscribe to our channel and ring notification for more videos like this.